Representative Connolly, you're recognized to present the veteran.
Members, it is my pleasure to introduce to you this week's Veteran of the Week, Corporal Joan Willauer. Please allow me to tell you a little bit about Joan. She was born in Madison, Wisconsin, where she graduated from high school in 1941. After graduation, Joan took a job as a telephone company operator, but her dream was to become a nurse. She applied to nursing school, but was turned down because she was too young. She was only 17 years old. She could have let her age delay her life goals, but in December of 1943, she decided to do something else that she was also too young for. She wanted to enlist in the Marine Corps. In those days, men could enlist in the service at the age of 18, but women had to be 21. But that did not stop Joan. She convinced her mother to agree to sign her approval papers to enlist underage, but she had to make one promise to her mother, that she would do it after Christmas. Being a good daughter, she followed her mother's wishes. After Christmas, though, she went straight to the recruiter's office in Madison, and from there rode with a group to Milwaukee to actually enlist. Joan went to boot camp at Camp LeJeune, North Carolina. She was a very long way from home. She recalls the first two words that she heard when she stepped from that bus: "You'll be sorry." But not Joan. She was not sorry. She loved the discipline and the order of military life. Her first assignment was to Cherry Point Naval Air Station in North Carolina. She worked in the supply section, where she was responsible for distributing radio gear to all of the units on base and to the outlying fields. Turns out, Joan was getting a preview of what it would later be to live in Tornado Alley. She said she lived through several hurricane warnings while at Cherry Point. All the planes would have to be moved to safer bases during the storms, but the personnel, they were required to remain on base. Joan has fond and fun memories of her time on base, but it's her letter home to her family on VJ Day that really stands out. In it, she expressed her exuberance and joy everyone felt when the victory was announced. Then she wrote that everyone had the impulse to go to the chapel for church. They wanted to give thanks to God for the end of the war. One Marine, she recalls, said that it was the only time he had ever had to stand in line to go to church. Cherry Point was significant to Joan for another reason. That's where, at the age of 20, she met her beloved husband, Edward Willauer, a Marine corporal from Pennsylvania. Their first date was in Washington, D.C. in 1944, and they dated until he was sent overseas. They were engaged in Chicago in 1946, and that was the year that Joan was discharged from the Marines. Joan and Edward were married at Camp Pendleton, California in 1947, and eventually had 8 children, 17 grandchildren, and 19 great-grandchildren. What a blessing. After this service to the Marines ended, Edward became a firefighter in Madison, Wisconsin, where he served with them for 30 years. Each winter, the two traveled to Corpus Christi, Texas, can't blame them, stopping in Norman to stay with their son, Ed Jr., and in 2000, they moved to the Sooner State to avoid the harsh Wisconsin winters. Sadly, Ed Sr. passed away just a year later in 2001. Joan is still active in the Women's Marine Association, the Oklahoma Women's Veterans Organization, and the American Legion. She's also active at her church in St. Joseph's Catholic Church, where she serves on the board of Gold Agers and takes communion to veterans at the Norman Veterans Center. It's my pleasure to recognize this once underage Marine and applaud her for her service to our great nation. Members, please join me in thanking Corporal Joan Willauer for her service.
Clerk will read the citation.
Whereas the Oklahoma House of Representatives holds in the highest esteem and deepest appreciation Veteran Joan Willauer for the sacrifices and contributions she has given in order to preserve the freedoms and privileges Americans hold so dear. And whereas Joan Willauer enlisted in the United States Marine Corps at the young age of 18, at that time Joan enlisted Women were to be 21 prior to enlisting. However, Joan wanted so fiercely to serve that she convinced her mother to sign approval papers allowing her to enlist underage. Joan served from 1943 to 1946. After boot camp at Camp LeJeune, North Carolina, Joan's first duty assignment was to Cherry Point Naval Air Station, North Carolina, where she worked in the supply section and was responsible for distributing radio gear to all units on base and outlying fields. And whereas among the most honored of all those who serve this nation are its veterans who protected all Americans from enemies both foreign and domestic. And whereas the state of Oklahoma holds great pride in honoring Joan Willauer as the Veteran of the Week and thanks you for your extraordinary devotion to our country and state. Now therefore, pursuant to the motion of Representative Sherry Conley, the state of Oklahoma extends to U.S. Marine Corps Veteran Joan Willauer sincere commendations and directs this citation be presented.
Would the members and guests in the gallery please rise as you're able for the Pledge of Allegiance? Corporal Willauer, you are recognized to lead us in the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like the House to recognize today, Monday, May 6th, as Women Veterans Day in Oklahoma. With this resolution, let us salute the service and sacrifices of the more than 29,000 female veterans who live in our state. I'm grateful for the women who've chosen to serve our great state and by joining the military. Military service takes an incredible toll on themselves and their families. I would also like to invite all members to become co-authors of the resolution and urge unanimous consent. Thank you, members, for helping me recognize this incredible lady and the women veterans of Oklahoma.